Hey, this is Joe during editing. While recording the audio for this video, my allergies started acting up. This recording took place over a few days, but my allergies started acting up, so my voice might sound congested or might sound a little bit off the further on into this video you get. So I do apologize about that. And this video is going to be a general overview of the 1800s from the defeat of Napoleon up until about 1890. Because this is going to start a series where I document the RP in the Country Simulation Season 14, which is from 1890 until whenever. Now, I did miss a few key details when it comes to this video, so this is in no means a complete documentary of the 1800s that would warrant a series of itself, which I do not have the time or effort to do. And there might be a few things that might be incredibly oversimplified or just like completely skipped over, and for that I do apologize. And if you'd like to watch a series with like a similar editing style, I would recommend watching Sergeant Salamander, who I actually had gotten his blessings to use a similar video style for this series, so for that I would like to thank him. And I will link his channel in the description, so if you'd like to go watch the guy who honestly perfected this kind of storytelling, I would seriously recommend it. And I'm also going to leave a link to the TCS Discord server if you would like to join in on the RP. So yeah, let's just get right into the video, and thank you for watching. The defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte in the Battle of Waterloo at the hands of the 7th Coalition in 1815 had ushered in a new era for the European continent, in which the great powers of the Russian Empire, the Austrian Empire, the United Kingdom, the Kingdom of Prussia, and France wouldn't fight another war on the scale of the Napoleonic Wars, rather opting to settle their disputes on the diplomatic stage or through small-scale conflicts locked to a specific region rather than spanning the entire continent. The Congress of Vienna, which had drastically rearranged the borders of Europe while providing a new balance of power to keep the peace, had served as a way for some of the great powers to desperately keep a hold of and expand their power over the smaller nations of Europe. The primary examples of this being Austria when it came to the Italian peninsula and the German states, and Russia in the Balkans. While Europe reveled in its era of relative peace, the Americas saw the collapse of the Spanish and Portuguese colonial empires in the New World and the rise of the United States as it sought to manifest its destiny across the North American continent. This led to the American president, James Monroe, to establish a diplomatic doctrine in which the United States would assume the role of protector of the new American nations, under the pretext that it would defend the former colonies from Europeans seeking to re-establish control over the lands. It also gave America the right to intervene in Latin American affairs if they were deemed to be in conflict with American interests. Within America, however, there was a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. The institution of slavery, which had kept the southern agricultural economy afloat, was growing more divisive by the day. When the Union went to war with, and won against, the Mexican Empire in the 1840s, the debate on if slavery should be expanded to the newly acquired territories flared tensions even more between the northern and southern states. Following a controversial election in 1860, the southern states would secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America, using the argument of states' rights and the preservation of slavery as the raison d'etre of the nation. This attempt at nationhood would prove to be fruitless after a long and brutal civil war where the Union came out victorious. This victory paved way for the outlawing of slavery in America and for the primacy of the Republican Party in national politics until the present day. Asia was more so a story of stagnation and decline for its major empire, the Qing dynasty. A series of deadly civil wars and famines rocked the Chinese nation, which added more fuel to the fire that was the Han resentment towards the Manchu-dominated government. Most importantly in the 1830s and 40s, due to the dynasty's insistence on conducting trade purely in silver, which had been the status quo since the failure of paper money during the previous Ming dynasty in the 1540s, proved to be a rather beneficial development for the empire. China had enjoyed a rather large trade surplus with the Europeans, as it only really needed to import silver for minting into currency, whereas the Europeans desperately attempted to enter into the rich Chinese markets through both legal and illegal means. This led to the British East India Company to use opium to conduct trade with the Chinese merchants rather than silver, which proved to be insanely lucrative for the EIC. In 1834, however, the monopoly that the company held on trade in China was broken up and the opium trade outlawed in China, partly due to silver being used to trade outside of China for opium. This would lead to growing tensions, and following the destruction of British stockpiles of opium in 1839, the British Empire deployed an expeditionary force against the Chinese in 1840, resulting in a British victory and the ceding of lands, particularly in Hong Kong and Canton. This would lead to another war later on, with the Qing losing and being forced into ceding more land to the Europeans. These wars, coupled with peasant revolts and a decaying power base, has the dynasty and the rest of China at a crossroads. Either keep to tradition and remain stagnant, or modernize like their neighbor, Japan. Japan, since the 1600s, has remained isolated under a feudal military dictatorship of the Tokugawa shogunate. This had caused the Japanese to remain woefully behind the rest of the world in terms of technological and economical development. However, following an American expedition that forcefully opened the country to trade, political instability began to rock the shogunate. Japan had watched as China was beaten down multiple times by the European powers and forced into unequal treaties. Some of the Japanese elites came to the conclusion that in order to prevent Japan from falling into the same fate as China, Japan must modernize, which essentially meant the overthrow of the shogunate. What followed was a coup d'etat of the shogunate, the restoration of the primacy of the Japanese emperor, and a civil war that saw the formation of the modern Japanese state. A new Japanese aristocracy was formed, composed of the former samurai, the emerging business tycoons, and the newly formed diet. Though the emperor held a rather significant amount of power in this new system, the Japanese empire began to industrialize rapidly, changing the lives of all of its citizens over the course of the next 30 years, with this trend not seeming to slow down. While all of this was unfolding in East Asia, West and South Asia was having its own story to unfold. The British and Russian empires were locked in a struggle against one another, dubbed as the Great Game, where they did everything in their power to undermine one another and ensure their respective expansion in the region. Persia, Afghanistan, the western viceroyalties of the Qing dynasty, and Central Asia were turned into a diplomatic fighting arena for the two powers, and sometimes an actual arena when the Russians sought to expand their borders towards Afghanistan and secure the Caucasus from Persia, and the British subdued the Indian subcontinent and fought several wars with the Afghans. While the Great Game appears to be winding down for now, its effects still linger in the region, especially with the two European powers looking towards the decaying Qing dynasty for more land and markets. Europe would be rocked with revolutions in the 1830s and 1848, which would see the old order of Europe threatened the most since the Napoleonic Wars. In 1830, the French had installed a popular constitutional monarchy that ousted the Bourbon kingdom that was set in place after the Napoleonic Wars. In Belgium, revolutionaries successfully fought for the independence of the nation, though granted at the cost of some land. In Italy, the idea of a unified Italian state spread like wildfire, which set Italy up for its wars of independence during the 1848 revolutions and beyond. In the 1848 revolution, the French monarchy was ousted and replaced with a continuation of the Napoleonic Empire, being led by Bonaparte's nephew, Napoleon III. In Germany, a failed attempt at unification had caused the German Confederation to dissolve temporarily, though it would set the Kingdom of Prussia up for a changing of history just a few decades later. Italy would erupt into a bloody war against the Austrians and states that were against unification, which, while the first war was unsuccessful, the later two wars that would be fought would be successful. Nearly every corner of Europe was affected by the liberal revolutions, though Europe wasn't able to rest fully just yet. The 1850s would see a war between Russia, the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, and later Sardinia-Piedmont, following a dispute between Russia and France over which nation can claim to be the protector of Christians within the Ottoman Empire, with the British supporting the French after Russian escalation, as well as a way to counter growing Russian influence in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. The war would be a brutal slog for both sides, ultimately ending in the defeat and humiliation of the Russian Empire. This would lead the Russians to look inwards and, although slowly, begin to modernize their economy, administration, and military. While this did shake the balance of power a bit, what came next would definitely change it. Following the failed German state in the 1848 revolutions, the idea of a unified Germany within the German states was a mixed bag. Some of the German people were in support. Some didn't care. The ruling elites, for the most part, were against it, as it would have meant the end of the independence of their states. However, the minister-president of Prussia, Otto von Bismarck, saw an opportunity to increase the power of Prussia in the early 1860s. If Prussia could thread the needle, perhaps it could secure a unified German state with it at the helm, and restructure the balance of power in Europe in Prussia's favor in the process. What followed was a war against Denmark, a war against Austria with the help of the Italians, and the final dissolution of the German Confederation and the formation of the North German Confederation. As the 1860s came to a close and the 1870s began, Bismarck would lead the Confederation into a war against France with the assistance of the southern German states, leading to their victory. This would lead to the formation of the German Empire, where the lesser German states would retain some autonomy in exchange for them allowing the declaration of the empire to go through in 1871. This would cause the balance of power to shift in a completely different direction, as now there was a land power in Europe that could rival both France and Russia, and had the backing of Austria due to the empire's fear of isolation, as well as the need to find new allies following the Ausgleich of the 1860s, forming the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The next 19 years would be somewhat peaceful for Europe and the world. The German, Japanese, and Italian economies began to grow, and the prominence of these new powers came along and soon. The Germans, Russians, and Austrians would join together in an alliance. However, it was fraught with instability as the Russians and Austrians disagreed with how the Balkans should be handled. The Triple Alliance was then formed between the Italians, Germans, and Austrians as a substitution to the previous alliance, all in accordance with Bismarck's plan to encircle France and keep them from being able to harm Germany directly. The European powers would also meet in Berlin in 1884 and see the African continent divvied out amongst the attendees, as well as the formation of a guideline for setting up colonies in Africa, as well as the Congo River Basin being granted to the King of Belgium as an international trading zone. As the year 1890 dawns on the world, there's only one thing that is certain. Things are going to get pretty interesting.